On the morning of May 19, 2019, a crowd gathered in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to watch a skyscraper die. 21 floors, 15 seconds, gone. That tower was the headquarters of Bethlehem Steel, for most of a century the second largest steelmaker in America. This is the company that rolled the steel in the Golden Gate Bridge. During World War II, it put 300,000 people to work and launched more than 1,000 ships, roughly 1 in 5 ships of the entire United States Navy. The beam it invented in 1908 is still holding up the building you're sitting near right now. And today, a casino rings where the ore yards were. The furnaces are concert lighting. The company itself doesn't exist. So how does the company that built America's skeleton end up as a demolition video? Everyone has the same answer: cheap foreign steel. And everyone is mostly wrong. The imports were real, but they're not what killed Bethlehem Steel. What killed it was smaller than that, quieter. It fits inside one room around 1970, where the future of the entire company sat 90% finished, and a hand came down and stamped it canceled. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what was in that room, why the smartest people in the industry begged them not to do it, and why the demolition you just watched started 49 years before the dynamite. This is Bigonomics. Grab a seat, the board's going to fill up. The story starts with a company that almost died at birth. April 1857, a merchant named Augustus Wally charters the Saucona Iron Company in a quiet Moravian church town on the Lehigh River. Months later, the panic of 1857 hits. The money dries up and construction just stops. The great American steel giant begins its life as a frozen construction site. It gets rescued by geography. 2 railroads cross in that valley, and railroads in the 1860s eat one thing: iron rails. So the furnaces finally light, and a chief engineer named John Fritz, one of the best iron men alive, turns the little works into a serious rail mill, sparks flying off the Bessemer converters like a permanent fireworks show. And for 20 years, the renamed Bethlehem Iron Company makes rails, and slowly learns rails are a terrible business. Everyone makes rails. Pittsburgh makes rails cheaper. When everyone makes the same thing, price is the only weapon, and price wars have no winners, just survivors with thinner margins every year. Bethlehem is a middleweight in a sport that only pays heavyweights, and middleweights who fight heavyweights on price don't retire rich. They just retire. So in the 1880s, Bethlehem makes the first of the 2 smartest decisions in its history. It stops selling steel by the ton and starts selling it by the fear. The United States Navy is rebuilding, and a warship needs armor plates, steel so hard a shell bounces off it. Almost nobody in America can make it. In 1891, Bethlehem opens the first armor plate plant in the country. Here's what that means in money. Armor sold for roughly 10 times the price of rails. Same furnaces, same town. 10 times the price, because they were the only ones who could. Remember that move? When the market got crowded, Bethlehem bet on the hard new thing nobody else could do. That instinct built this company. And in about 80 years, we're going to watch the same company face the same choice and do the exact opposite. Now the company gets its soul, and its soul is a gambler. Charles Schwab starts working life driving stakes in a Carnegie steel yard for $25 a month. He learns the business in a world where night shifts and day shifts fought each other with a piece of chalk, each crew scrawling its production number on the mill floor, daring the next shift to beat it. That was the whole management system, a number written in chalk and pride. Schwab never forgot it. By 35, he's president of Carnegie Steel, the most feared steel company on earth. In December 1900, at a New York dinner, he gives a 30-minute speech so good that J.P. Morgan, sitting right next to him, decides to buy the entire industry. That speech becomes U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar company in history. Schwab is its first president. He is 39 years old, and he celebrates like a man who knows it. He starts building the largest private house Manhattan has ever seen. 75 rooms, some say more, with its own chapel, bowling alley, and power plant. And then he throws it all away. In 1902, newspapers catch him at the roulette tables of Monte Carlo. Schwab breaks the bank. Andrew Carnegie, Schwab's mentor, a man who considered gambling roughly equivalent to arson, fires off a furious cable. Public sentiment is shocked. You'll probably have to resign. Serves you right. Morgan, to his credit, just shrugs. He's all right. But the damage compounds. The scandal doesn't fire him, but the fights that follow do the damage. And by 1903, Schwab is out, the ex-president of the biggest company on earth, holding one personal side investment, a small steelmaker in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with less than 1% of the nation's steel capacity. Everyone thought he was finished. He thought he'd found a casino with better odds, because Schwab was carrying an idea U.S. Steel had already rejected, a strange new way to roll a steel beam, invented by an engineer named Henry Gray. One continuous shape, wider flanges, lighter than the old riveted columns, stronger and cheaper. If it worked, every tall building in America would want it. If it failed, Bethlehem died with it. Then the panic of 1907 arrives. Banks are collapsing, credit is vanishing, and the new mill still needs $4 million, $1908, that Bethlehem doesn't really have. Schwab keeps building anyway. If we're going to go bust, he reportedly said, we'll go bust big. In January 1908, the first wide flange beam rolls out glowing. They call it the Bethlehem beam. For 19 years, no one else in America can make it. Skylines start growing on Bethlehem's spine. And if you're near a steel frame building right now, its skeleton is probably this exact shape. The bet paid for a century. War makes the gamble look small. When World War I breaks out, Bethlehem becomes America's #1 weapons maker. Shells, guns, armor, submarines. 31,000 workers streamed through the South Bethlehem Gate alone. When the Lusitania went down in 1915, there were over 1,000 cases of Bethlehem-made artillery shells in her hold. That's how deep this company sat inside the war. The profits buy rival mills up and down the East Coast, Sparrows Point in Maryland, Lackawanna in New York, Johnstown in Pennsylvania. Remember that last name. By the 1920s, Bethlehem is the permanent #2 of American steel. But watch what's happening at the top, because this is where the disease enters the bloodstream. Schwab's successor is Eugene Grace, a sea captain's son, Lehigh valedictorian, a shortstop good enough that professional teams came calling. He turned them down flat. I don't think I went to Lehigh to learn to play baseball, he said, and took a job operating an electric crane instead. He outworks everyone, runs the company for 4 decades, and they call him Mr. Steel. And he runs it like a kingdom. When workers try to organize, Grace gives them a company union, a union owned by the company, which is a little like a courtroom owned by the defendant. In 1939, the government rules it illegal. 2 years later, a real strike finally forces Bethlehem to recognize the steelworkers' union, a defeat Grace never forgave, and the opening shot of a 40-year war between the tower and the mill floor. Hold on to that, because both sides of that war are going to help dig the grave. In 1929, Eugene Grace's salary is $12,000. His bonus is over $1.6 million, 130 times his salary, the biggest paycheck in America. When shareholders find out what the bonus system has been paying, they sue to claw back $36 million. They settle. Nobody gives anything back. The locals even had a name for the hill where Grace built his 23-bedroom estate, Bonus Hill. And the money builds a world. Grace co-founds the Saucon Valley Country Club, where for decades, about 90% of the members are Bethlehem management. Inside headquarters, managers eat in separate dining rooms, assigned by rank, a caste system with tablecloths. Company police watch the road for Grace's chauffeured car, and when it approaches, every elevator is cleared and dropped to the lobby so the emperor can ride up alone. Here's the thing though, the company still deserved its arrogance. The mills were the best in the world. The beam monopoly was real. Being untouchable wasn't a delusion yet. It was about to become one, right after the greatest performance any American company ever gave. December 1941. America enters World War II needing a 2-ocean navy, and Bethlehem Steel becomes something no company had ever been. 15 shipyards running day and night. By the end of the war, 1,121 ships, 1 in 5 ships of the United States Navy came out of Bethlehem's yards. The workforce hits 300,000 people, a private army bigger than most real armies, feeding a home plant that sprawled across 1,600 acres, its blast furnace row lying along the Lehigh River like a sleeping iron dragon. At the Hingham Yard in Massachusetts, a shipyard that hadn't existed 2 years earlier, they built 277 ships in 3.5 years. Their record, a full destroyer escort, a warship, in 23 days. Most people can't renovate a kitchen in 23 days. In 1943, the Navy asks that one yard for 60 ships. It delivers 90. Sales go from $135 million before the war to $1.33 billion by 1945. 10 times the company in 6 years. One man missed the party. Charles Schwab, the gambler who built all of it, had died in September 1939, 2 weeks after the war in Europe began. And here's the detail that tells you everything about how he lived. The man who created 2 steel empires died about $300,000 in the red. Broke, his estate had to sell his Bethlehem stock to cover the debts. Right before wartime demand sent that stock through the roof. The house with 75 rooms was torn down a few years later. The company he built kept climbing without him. Post-war America is one giant steel order. Cars, bridges, appliances, suburbs. By 1955, Bethlehem sits in the top 10 of the very first Fortune 500 list ever printed. By the late 50s, it employs 165,000 people in peacetime, pours 19 million tons a year, and its president is, again, the highest-paid executive in America. The country club adds a second championship course, then a third. Take one long look at this picture, because no American company ever stood higher than this. The most profitable steelmaker on earth, running the town it lives in, paying its men like kings, with no rival anywhere in sight. Quick detour, because you've probably heard Bethlehem built the Empire State Building. It didn't. That steel came from its great rival. But the true list doesn't need padding. The Golden Gate Bridge, a tower of the Verrazano Narrows, skyscrapers from coast to coast standing on the wide flange shape Bethlehem invented. They didn't just supply the skyline, they designed its DNA. Now, do you remember what Bethlehem did the last time it was on top? It bet everything on the hard new thing. Keep that in mind. Because at this exact moment, on the other side of the world, somebody is building a better furnace. The turn starts in 1959, and almost nobody at the time understood what they were watching. That summer, 500,000 steelworkers walk out, the largest strike in American history. It isn't even mostly about wages, it's about a contract clause called 2B, work rules. Management wants to change how many men run each machine, and by then the rulebook had grown teeth. When one crane got air conditioning in the cab, the relief man who used to spell the sweating operator kept his job anyway. Jobs one man could do required crews of 3. The union says no to changing any of it. The mills sit chained for 116 days until President Eisenhower invokes emergency powers and the Supreme Court orders everyone back. And after all that, management wins none of the changes it wanted. But the strike's real damage isn't in the contract. For 4 months, American factories still needed steel, so for the first time ever, they bought it from Japan and Europe. And they noticed something nobody in Bethlehem wanted to hear. It was cheaper, and it was good. Imports doubled that year, and they never went back down. 1959 is the first year in the century that America imported more steel than it sold to the world. The door had opened, and it stayed open forever. And through the decades that follow, the water keeps rising, a trickle in 1960, over a sixth of the market by the late 60s, 1 ton in 5 by the early 80s, and nearly 1 in 3 by the late 90s. Slow enough that every single year you could tell yourself it was temporary. Both sides kept feeding the problem. By the early 80s, a Bethlehem steelworker's total package hit $26 an hour, roughly 60% above the average American factory wage. And senior men had 13-week paid vacations every 5 years, written into the contract. Nobody making those promises asked who'd be paying for them in 20 years. Now, an open door only matters if someone in your house is asleep. So here's the sleep test. Back in 1952, Austria had commercialized a new furnace, the basic oxygen furnace. It made steel dramatically faster than Bethlehem's open hearths. A tiny Michigan company ran one by 1954. Japan committed its whole industry by 1957. Bethlehem Steel, the company that once bet its life on unproven technology, looked at the biggest furnace breakthrough in a generation and waited an entire decade. The attitude inside, as one insider put it, why bother with this untested stuff? We're doing very well without it. 1964, that's when Bethlehem installs its first one. 10 years behind a company 100th its size. The Gamblers Company had stopped gambling. And the next decision is the one this whole video has been pointing at. And what was Bethlehem's big move of the 60s? In 1962, it broke ground on Burns Harbor, Indiana, a brand new integrated megamill on the old model, $1 billion of blast furnaces on the shore of Lake Michigan. It would be the last integrated steel mill ever built in America by anyone. Everyone else had stopped believing in dinosaurs. Bethlehem built one more, the biggest yet. And to be fair, it was a magnificent dinosaur. Remember it, it outlives everything. Because the future wasn't being built on Lake Michigan, it was being built in a field in South Carolina. Understand the new predator, because it's almost funny how small it was. In 1969, a nearly bankrupt conglomerate called Nucor opens a little steel mill in Darlington, South Carolina. Cost about $6 million. It doesn't even have a blast furnace. It melts scrap metal, junk cars, old rails in an electric furnace and pours it straight through a machine, big steel barely used, a continuous caster. No ingots, no reheating, no armies of men in between. Steel in one smooth pour, at a fraction of the cost. Bethlehem's executives look at this mouse and say, and this is a real quote from inside the company, "If a guy comes on stream with 60,000 tons a year, let's not worry about that." One of their own metallurgists, a man named Mike Harasemchuk, saw it clearly. His warning: one guy here, one guy here, one guy here, and pretty soon you see the old customers disappear. And the math behind his warning was brutal. So let's draw it once, because it explains the next 30 years. To make steel Bethlehem's way, you dig ore in one country, ship it across an ocean, cook it with coal in a blast furnace the size of a cathedral, pour ingots, reheat the ingots, roll them, and pay 100,000 salaries and pensions at every step along the way. To make steel Nucor's way, you buy a junkyard scrap, melt it with electricity, and pour it once. Same product, a fraction of the people, a fraction of the steps. And Bethlehem carried one more cost Nucor didn't: the most managers per ton of steel in the entire industry. A tower full of people whose job was, increasingly, each other. You don't beat that math with patriotism, you beat it by changing how you make steel. Or you don't beat it at all. And here's the part that should make you sit up. Bethlehem was already building the answer. At its Johnstown plant, one of those mills the World War I profits bought, a continuous caster of Bethlehem's own stood 90% complete around 1970. 90%, the machine that made Nucor possible, nearly finished, inside Bethlehem's own fence. Harasimchuk argued to finish it, to learn the technique that was about to revolutionize steelmaking. He was overruled. Bethlehem stopped the caster at 90%, wrote off $10 million, and tore it down. This is the moment Bethlehem Steel died. It just didn't know it yet. Want to know what they built instead? A headquarters. Martin Tower, 21 stories, opened 1972, designed in the shape of a cross. Why a cross? It multiplies the corner offices. Inside, New York decorators, hand-woven carpets, the company logo on the doorknobs, and a marble lobby where uniformed attendants ran the elevators. A historian later put it in one line: they invested in an office tower rather than in continuous casters, and the scoreboard on that choice came fast. By 1975, Japan was pouring almost a third of its steel through continuous casters. America, 9%. Meanwhile, in 1974, Bethlehem posts the biggest profit in its history, $342 million, and the champagne corks fly at the club. It's a record built on a bull market and borrowed time. The trapdoor is already cut. September 30th, 1977. Inside Martin Tower, they'll remember it as Black Friday. Bethlehem announces its first loss in over 50 years, $448 million. At the time, one of the biggest corporate losses ever recorded. 2,500 white-collar jobs vanish in one stroke. That day, hundreds walk out of the tower carrying boxes. For 100 years, Bethlehem had been the place your job outlived you. That idea died on a Friday. Then it gets worse. 1982, the loss is $1.5 billion, roughly $5 billion in today's money, with 5 straight losing years stacking almost $2 billion in red ink. Whole plants go dark. In the town of Lackawanna, New York, steelmaking simply ends. By 1986, the stock of the mightiest name in American industry is trading at $4. And the men in the tower, the chairman's pay nearly doubles that same year to $555,000 while the mill's idle. 400 people protest outside headquarters, the chauffeurs, the jets, the private dining rooms with their caste system seating. All of it still on the books, being trimmed one embarrassment at a time. The chairman does give a diagnosis. Our problems, he says, are imports. First, second, and third. Congress hears it, tariffs come, it doesn't matter. Because while every executive eye watches the ocean, the real killer is driving up the interstate. Nucor by the 1980s is the anti-Bethlehem in every measurable way. 20-something people at headquarters, in rented offices, across from a deli. 4 layers of management instead of Bethlehem's tower full. In 1982, Nucor's own boss, Ken Iverson, misses his targets and cuts his own pay by 3/4 to $110,000. In the same recession, his workers take 25% cuts, his officers take 60%, and the layoffs total 0. And here's the twist that breaks every stereotype. Through production bonuses, Nucor's non-union workers became some of the best-paid steelworkers in America, at the industry's lowest labor cost per ton. Everybody won except the old way of doing things. There was even a map out of the trap, and a rival took it. U.S. Steel spent $6 billion buying an oil company in 1982, diversified, and survived. Bethlehem had spent the fat decades insisting it would stick to what it knew best: steel, only steel. And when a new chairman finally did try diversifying, he did it the worst possible way. Announced it, half-built it, lost his nerve, and sold the pieces to refocus on steel. A company that had spent 70 years refusing to change direction now couldn't even commit to a U-turn, all the way down. In 1988, one last false dawn. Cost cuts finally bite. The market swings up, and Bethlehem books a record $400 million profit. The obituary writers put their pens down. Then, 1989, Nucor's new mill in Indiana does the thing Big Steel swore was impossible. It casts thin slabs of flat sheet steel, the premium product, Bethlehem's crown jewels, straight from scrap. The mice weren't coming for the crumbs anymore. They were at the throne. And this time there was no armor plate to run to, no new beam, no next bet. Because the people who made those bets had been gone for half a century, and the company that remained only knew how to defend. November 18, 1995. In the town called Bethlehem, at the plant where it all started, the last cast rolls out and the furnaces go cold, after nearly a century and a half of fire. The company survives it. Technically, it has one debt left to pay, and the debt is people. Here's the math that ends a 140-year-old empire. Every year of the Golden Age had promised workers a pension and healthcare for life, promises priced for a company of $165,000 that kept shrinking. By the fall of 2001, Bethlehem Steel has 13,000 employees, supporting 95,000 retirees. Read that again. For every person making steel, more than 7 are drawing checks from it. The past now outnumbers the present 7-1, and the healthcare bill alone runs $300 million a year. October 15, 2001. Chapter 11, the 25th American steel company to file in 4 years, but by far the biggest. 8 months later, the stock is removed from the New York Stock Exchange, where it had traded for generations. The pension plan is 45% funded, a $7.8 billion promise, backed by $3.5 billion in assets. The federal pension agency absorbs it, 92,000 people, a nearly $4 billion hole, the largest pension takeover in American history at that point. Every private pension in America pays insurance premiums into that agency, which means in the end, the bill for the country club decades was quietly split among everyone else's retirement plans. And the healthcare? Pensions had a federal safety net, healthcare had none, it just ends. Letters in mailboxes. Some 7,000 retirees are later told the checks they'd received were too big and ordered to pay money back. Meanwhile, months before the filing, the departing chief executive collects a $2.5 million severance. In 2003, everything left, the mills, the brands, the century, sells to a buyout group for $822.6 million in cash. The newspaper said $1.5 billion. The number in the actual securities filings is $822.6. Adjusted for inflation, the whole empire went for less than one good year's profit from the 1970s. Bethlehem Steel Corporation was dissolved that year, not restructured, not renamed, erased. So what's left? Go to Bethlehem today, and the blast furnaces are still standing, floodlit purple, as the backdrop of a concert stage. $250 million turned the dying plant into an arts campus, and 1 million people a year now visit the place the company town was supposed to become a ghost. A casino rings where the ore yards were. Sparrows Point kept making steel for 9 more years under other owners. And Burns Harbor, the billion-dollar megamill Bethlehem bet on in 1962, is still making steel right now profitably for somebody else. That's the quiet punchline of this whole story. The steel was never the problem. The mills outlived the company. Only the decisions died. And Martin Tower, the cross-shaped monument to corner offices, the building they chose over the caster? It stood vacant for 12 years. Too expensive to fill, too big to ignore. Then, on a May morning in 2019, they packed it with dynamite. And the crowd you saw at the start of this video watched 49 years of consequences land in 15 seconds. Here's the verdict, and you can draw it on one board. Bethlehem Steel was built by 2 bets on hard new technology. Armor plate in 1891, the beam in 1908. Made by people who knew being early is expensive and being late is fatal. It was killed by the refusal of a third bet its own engineers had already built to 90%. Not by Japan, not mainly by imports. By comfort, compounding quietly for decades like interest on a debt nobody wrote down. But the beam never died. Steel builders still roll Bethlehem's wide flange shape today. Look at any steel skeleton going up in any city on Earth, and you're looking at the ghost of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, still holding up the world that forgot it. Empires fall, decisions are forever. So here's my question for you. If they finished that caster in 1970, does Bethlehem Steel exist today? Or was the country club always going to win? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. The board's already filling up with the next dead empire.